On November 29, 2023, the state of Missouri carried out the execution of Christopher Collings. Convicted of one of the most disturbing crimes in recent memory, the rape and murder of 9-year-old Rowan Ford, his death closed a case that had haunted the small town of Stella since 2007. To some, the execution was justice long overdue for an unspeakable crime. To others, it was a grim reminder of the state's ultimate punishment, death by lethal injection. That night, inside Missouri's execution chamber, Collings was strapped to the gurney, given one final meal, and allowed one last chance to speak. This is the story of his final 24 hours, the food he ate, the words he spoke, and the crime that shocked an entire community. But to understand how Christopher Collings ended up on death row, we must first go back to a cold November night in 2007, when a little girl named Rowan Ford vanished from her home. Rowan Ford was just 9 years old. A fourth grader at Triway Elementary in Stella, Missouri, she was the kind of child who lit up everywhere she walked into. Teachers described her as bright and eager to learn, a little girl with an infectious smile and a kind heart. She loved drawing, riding her bike around the neighborhood, and playing with her friends. To her mother, Colleen, she was not just a daughter but the center of her world. Rowan lived in a small trailer home with her mother and stepfather, David Spears. Life in Stella was modest, quiet, a rural town where neighbors knew each other, and children could still play outside without fear. But for Rowan, that small-town safety would vanish in an instant. On the night of November 2, 2007, Colleen left home for an overnight shift at the Walmart where she worked. Rowan stayed behind with her stepfather, David. By all accounts, it was supposed to be an ordinary night. But when Colleen returned home the next morning, her world fell apart. Rowan was gone. David claimed he had gone out with friends for a short while, leaving Rowan asleep. When he came back, he said, the trailer door was open, and Rowan had vanished. The disappearance of a 9-year-old child sent shockwaves through the community. Law enforcement was immediately called in, and within hours, search teams began combing the rural countryside. Neighbors, friends, and complete strangers joined in, walking fields, searching woods, holding flashlights late into the night. Flyers with Rowan's picture were posted in gas stations and pinned to church bulletin boards. Volunteers gathered in prayer circles, begging for her safe return. Colleen, devastated, pleaded through tears for her daughter to come home. But as the hours turned to days, hope began to dim. Investigators started asking harder questions, about who had been with Rowan that night, and what really happened inside that trailer while her mother was away. As investigators searched desperately for Rowan Ford, suspicion quickly turned to the two men closest to her that night, her stepfather, David Spears, and his friend, Christopher Collings. Both men had been together on the night Rowan vanished. Spears admitted he had gone out drinking with Collings, leaving Rowan alone in the trailer. When he returned, he said, she was gone. At first, the men denied knowing anything. But the story soon began to crack. Collings, a 32-year-old factory worker who lived nearby, gave shifting accounts of his actions that night. Then, in the days that followed, the truth began to emerge. On November 9, just 1 week after Rowan disappeared, Collings confessed. He told investigators that he had taken Rowan from her home, driven her to his trailer, and sexually assaulted her. Then, with the help of David Spears, he strangled her to death. The horror didn't end there. Collings admitted to taking Rowan's body and dumping it in an abandoned cave in rural McDonald County. Investigators rushed to the site, and what they found confirmed every parent's worst nightmare. Deep inside the cave lay Rowan Ford's body. She had been raped and murdered, her young life stolen in the most brutal way imaginable. The community of Stella, Missouri, was shattered. Candlelight vigils turned into memorials. Parents held their children closer. What had once been a quiet rural town was now home to one of the most heinous crimes in state history. David Spears, Rowan's stepfather, initially faced suspicion too. For a time, prosecutors considered his role, given Collings' claim that Spears had been involved. But as the case developed, the focus narrowed squarely on Collings. His own words, his own confession, left little doubt. From that moment forward, Christopher Collings was the face of Rowan Ford's murder. A name synonymous with cruelty, betrayal, and unforgivable violence. After his confession, Christopher Collings was formally charged with the capital murder, rape, and sodomy of 9-year-old Rowan Ford. For the people of Missouri, it was one of the most closely watched trials in recent memory. The prosecution's case was overwhelming. They had Collings' own words, his detailed admission of how he kidnapped Rowan, assaulted her, strangled her, and dumped her body in a cave. Investigators also presented physical evidence linking Rowan to his trailer, along with Collings' precise directions that led them to her body. What stunned many in the courtroom was Collings' own demeanor. He didn't take the stand to fight the charges. He didn't claim innocence. Instead, he calmly admitted to the crime, repeating the same details he had told investigators. At times, Collings tried to drag Rowan's stepfather, David Spears, into the case. He claimed Spears had helped him strangle Rowan after the assault. But prosecutors found little evidence to support that accusation. In the end, Spears pleaded guilty only to a reduced charge of endangering the welfare of a child, acknowledging that he had left Rowan alone that night, but denying involvement in the killing itself. For Collings, there would be no such escape. The jury was shown crime scene photographs, heard the medical examiner's findings, and listened as Rowan's grieving mother testified about the daughter she lost. Prosecutors told the jurors that this was not a crime of impulse, but one of calculated cruelty. The defense argued for mercy. They pointed to Collings' heavy drinking, his troubled background, and suggested he felt remorse for what he had done. But their words fell flat. The age of the victim, the brutality of the assault, and the betrayal of trust left the jury unmoved. In March of 2012, the verdict was returned, guilty of first-degree murder. The sentence, death by lethal injection. For Rowan's mother, Colleen, the decision brought a measure of justice, though not healing. For the community of Stella, the trial ended one chapter, but the pain of losing Rowan would never truly fade. After the guilty verdict and death sentence in 2012, Christopher Collings was transferred to Missouri's death row at the Potosi Correctional Center. From that moment forward, his world shrank to a cell, a schedule, and the slow crawl of time. Death row in Missouri is a stark existence. Inmates are locked down nearly 23 hours a day, confined to cells with a bunk, a sink, and a toilet. For Collings, the days blurred into years. He wrote letters, spoke occasionally with attorneys, and clung to the appeals process as his only lifeline. His lawyers filed motion after motion. They argued that Collings had not received a fair trial, that his intoxication on the night of the crime should have been given more weight, and that some forensic evidence had been mishandled. They appealed to the Missouri Supreme Court, to federal courts, and even sought clemency. But each appeal was denied. Judges pointed to the overwhelming evidence, his own confession, the forensic proof, and the cruelty of the crime. The brutality of what he admitted to, the rape, the struggling, and the disposal of Rowan's body in a cave, left little room for doubt or mercy. Meanwhile, outside the prison walls, the memory of Rowan Ford never faded. Each court filing made headlines, each denied appeal reopened the wound for her mother, Colleen. For the family, justice was constantly delayed. By 2023, after more than a decade of legal battles, the courts had spoken their final word. On November 29, the state of Missouri scheduled the execution of Christopher Collings. After 16 years of waiting, the Ford family was told the sentence would finally be carried out. On November 29, 2023, Christopher Collings woke up in the death watch cell at Missouri's Eastern Reception, Diagnostic and Correctional Center in Bonne Terre. It was his last sunrise. By law, inmates scheduled for execution are placed under constant observation during their final days. Guards monitored him closely, ensuring he could not take his own life before the state carried out its sentence. That morning, Collings was served a standard prison breakfast. In Missouri, condemned inmates are still permitted to request a special last meal, though not every prisoner takes advantage of it. Reports from prison officials noted that Collings kept his request simple, declining anything extravagant. Whatever the reason, whether resignation or defiance, his final meal stood in stark contrast to the monstrous crime that put him there. Throughout the day, Collings was allowed limited visits. His attorneys met with him one final time, ensuring every legal option had been exhausted. A spiritual advisor also visited, offering him the chance to pray and confess. Prison staff described him as calm, speaking in low tones, his demeanor steady. Outside the prison walls, Rowan Ford's family and community members gathered. Some held quiet vigils, remembering the little girl who never made it to her 10th birthday. Others carried signs demanding justice, insisting that this was the day Missouri would finally close the chapter on Rowan's murder. As the hours ticked away, Collings wrote a few final notes and prepared himself for the evening ahead. By late afternoon, the atmosphere inside the prison grew heavier. Reporters were escorted to the witness area, state officials arrived to oversee the procedure, and family members of Rowan Ford were seated in the viewing chamber. At approximately 6 p.m., correctional officers entered Collings' cell. Shackles were placed on his wrists and ankles. He was escorted down the sterile hallway toward the brightly lit execution chamber. It was the last walk Christopher Collings would ever take. At 6 p.m. on November 29, 2023, an IV line was inserted into his arm, the clear tubing running back toward the curtain where the lethal chemicals waited. Behind a pane of glass, the witnesses sat in silence. When asked if he had any final words, Christopher Collings spoke clearly. He did not use the moment to apologize. Instead, he repeated his claim that he had been drinking the night Rowan died, and insisted he never meant for things to go as far as they did. He said he was sorry for the pain caused, but never took full responsibility for the rape and murder he had confessed to years earlier. For Rowan's family, those words were hollow. They had waited 16 years for justice, and nothing Collings said in that chamber could erase what he had done. At 6:13 p.m., the warden gave the signal. The first chemical began to flow through the IV line. Witnesses described Collings taking a deep breath, his chest rising once, then falling still. Within minutes, his eyelids lowered and his body went motionless. By 6:23 p.m., a doctor entered the chamber, checked his pulse, and pronounced him dead. After 16 years of appeals, delays, and waiting, the state of Missouri had carried out the execution of Christopher Collings. For Rowan Ford's family, it was the end of a long and painful journey, though no punishment could ever bring back the little girl they had lost. News of Christopher Collings' execution spread quickly across Missouri and beyond, by the next morning. For Rowan's mother, Colleen, the execution brought a measure of closure. In a statement to the press, she said that justice had finally been served. She spoke softly but firmly, saying her daughter's voice had been silenced, and now the man responsible for taking her away had been silenced as well. Other family members expressed relief but also grief that could never truly fade. For them, the execution was not a victory, it was simply the end of a long, painful chapter. Rowan was still gone. In the small town of Stella, people remembered Rowan as the little girl who once rode her bike down quiet streets, who smiled brightly in class, and who was taken far too soon. The cave where her body was found became a haunting reminder of what had been lost. Public opinion across Missouri was firm. The brutality of the crime, the age of the victim, and Collings' own confession left little sympathy. Unlike other death penalty cases that sparked debate about guilt or fairness, this one was seen by many as clear. A child had been taken, murdered, and struggled. The man who admitted to it had faced the ultimate penalty. But even in certainty, the story left behind a shadow. Some saw it as proof of why the death penalty exists. Others saw it as another reminder of the darkest side of humanity. That evil can live in ordinary places, carried out by ordinary faces. What remained undeniable was the memory of Rowan Ford. A girl of just 9 years, whose life was stolen in the cruelest way imaginable. The execution of Christopher Collings ended one of the darkest chapters in Missouri's recent history. For 16 years, the case of Rowan Ford haunted her family, her community, and everyone who heard her story. In the end, Collings was held accountable for what he confessed to, the rape and murder of a 9-year-old girl. But no execution, no sentence, could ever erase the pain of that night in 2007, or bring Rowan back to her mother's arms. Her name, her smile, and her short life remain the most important part of this story. What do you think? Was justice truly served on November 29, 2023, or was it simply another tragedy added to a story already marked by loss? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this case as chilling as we did, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next deep dive into America's most haunting death row stories.